Hi guys. This Friday towards the end of July. We're just kind of recording this as kind of a staff chat amongst all the other kind of bits of business that we conduct in these little staff meetings. And just to know, we talked about this kind of over the past few weeks, but we've been expecting a planning application to be lodged. We've been expecting it to be lodged months ago for this year's Christmas market or the winter festivals. And obviously COVID has had a major impact on timing for all these things, which we kind of accept. But we were led to believe in the last meeting we actually held a couple of weeks ago with Underbelly and their planning consultants that the Council's Policy and Sustainability Committee were meant to be seeing something, to talk about what was going to be happening. And we now know, kind of interestingly, that there's been a kind of a private kind of meeting in between councillors and council officials in Underbelly. And something is expected kind of in August. So we're in this kind of curious space of having the time running down for when we need to get to something and not really knowing what it is we're going to pick up. And we noted, because this kind of came up in a previous conversation we had, of the conflicting stories at the moment. One hand we've seen, news things saying the winter festivals are going to take place, and then we've seen, the Hogmanay Street Party cancelled. So it's all kind of slightly confusing. Any thoughts about where people think we are with this at the moment?
I suppose confusing and confused is the right way of putting it, partly based on the headlines we've seen of are we not, well maybe we are, we can't quite see what it is we're doing at the moment. But the one thing we can be sure of it that it's against a context of the winter, of COVID, of possibly the perfect storm of COVID, flu, and of course the notoriously dodgy Christmas Hogmanay weather of Edinburgh as well. Those things are certain. But what, if anything, is going to happen in terms of a Christmas festival, any kind of Hogmanay celebration, all of that, which is really incredibly important for many, many people, is very unclear this time.
Yeah.
There's definitely a growing disquiet out there from residents and business about the uncertainty. There seems to be confusing messages and conflicting messages coming out, and it's not helped by secret closed-door meetings. We need to have more open discussions from the council so that residents and businesses have more certainty.
Yeah, and it comes, I think, at a time as well when the headline is one of those interesting story placements in the media, wasn't it? Of kind of announcing something is going to go ahead, although what it is, we're not too sure, against a whole series of massive budget cuts in the context that the city council contracts, i.e. pays Underbelly to deliver the Christmas market. That's not an illogical thing to do. That's how it's been run for some time. But
and that certainly has brought forth lots of discussions amongst residents. I mean, there's been cuts announced at various times, even prior to the COVID emergency. At the beginning of the year, I think it was reported that there was about 4.8 million cuts coming. That was in January. That jumped to 36 million being reported in February. But this week it was announced there would be 15.9 million eventual cuts, but with an initial cut of 8.95 million from the health and social care budget. So the question then becomes about the relationship with commercial enterprises and whether those cuts can be justified.
One thing that we can, based on long-established research, say is that the healthcare effect of removing that level of health and care, social care funding from the city, will include, among many other things, will include a depression of accessibility, for example, in terms of the ability of carers and cared for to physically and financially access anything that is provided by the city at Christmas time. Yeah. Healthcare budgets are a major economic driver for the city, a major social inclusion driver for the city, and cutting them reduces that very positive impact and reduces the accessibility, as I've mentioned.
That may not be a direct issue for the Cockburn in terms of what our remit is, but yeah, it certainly is kind of a big kind of feature of the kind of issues going forward. And kind of in linking these things kind of up in the stress to kind of budgets. I found one of the really interesting parts in one of the pieces is that the deputy leader of the council made the comment that having a street party of 75,000 people gathered in close proximity didn't make much sense in today's global pandemic, and I think we would all agree and have see that as sensible. But it's then kind of hard to think of how you would then have something like the Christmas market, which we were told last year, although not having seen the figures, 2.6 million people pass through what is actually quite a constrained kind of site anyway. So I guess that what we need to see is a real clarity of thinking coming forward from the city about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. So that's kind of something we'd be looking forward to. And coming back, I think, to your kind of issue about kind of access, we shouldn't lose sight, of the notion that East Princes Street Gardens was essentially taken out of public use from the beginning of October and wasn't really fully reinstated, still inaccessible because of the nature of things, until the beginning of May. So half a year passed as a result. And that's kind of at a time when we know access to public spaces was just so critical. So I guess that the Cockburn campaign about keep off the grass is still kind of resolute coming forward. The other kind of issue which kind of really strikes me as well is about this planning application coming forward. We were the ones who kind of brought that out by just asking the daft laddie question: does this thing need planning consent? And that's going ahead. It's a major development. The discussions that we had kind of with Underbelly and the planning consultants at the time was, an application was coming forth soon, kind of when, but they would need to have a drop dead date for the implementation of a consent. And that's probably in October, because I think it's fair to say that the space deck is continuing on the agenda for kind of Underbelly, that kind of physical enhancement of kind of space with this kind of structure. But I'm working back the ways, so if they need a consent in October, by October, then we're at the end of approaching the end of July now. That means there's only 2 months to process a major planning application, which will have an environmental statement, a heritage impact assessment. We'll need to go through a whole raft of consultation kind of things as well. So I guess it's about gearing up for that planning application coming in when it comes.
And the wider implications of the privatisation again of public space.
Yeah.
A space deck that takes up an entire lawn isn't acceptable to many Edinburgh residents, and that's something that has to be.
One of the points mooted in conversations is the notion of a time-ticketed event. That is, you don't just show up and wander about and buy your bratwurst or whatever it is, but you you need to book a time slot in advance. Do we have a feeling for that? Is there?
I feel like that will completely change the whole experience of the market, really. People, they've sort of capitalised on Christmas shopping becoming this whole experience that's enjoyable, and you do it with your friends or your family. And if it's a time-ticketed in-out situation where you have to go through and hit all the right stalls in 45 minutes or whatever the time frame is, then it's a quite different experience than being able to linger with your, overpriced cup of whatever. Quite different.
You see how that sort of concept works for a swimming pool or a boating lake, but as Lucy points out, if you've got a bratwurst in one hand and 5 children in the other, it's difficult to see how it can be an enjoyable experience. But over and above that, the Christmas market will, if it does happen, will be a shiny jewel that will act as a honeypot. So anybody who's around in the city centre will, if they're there for a Christmas experience, will inevitably, I would have thought, gravitate towards the Christmas market, regardless of whether it's ticketed or not. So you've got this attraction drawing people in, people who perhaps don't know that it's ticketed, don't know that there's limited access, and how on earth are you going to manage the inevitable confusion of crowds and groups, perhaps even queues of people waiting to get in with their tickets, but other people who are just there for a Christmas experience, but being drawn into the confusion of crowds, groups, and everything else that happens within it. And over and above that, of course, there's the social distancing that is already being put in place by the council to facilitate safer movement. So all of that makes a very confused city centre.
Yeah, and I guess one of the questions that really raises is if it is time ticketing, if that is how it's going to be managed, then you need to have gates. You can't have a permeable kind of site, and you need to manage that. And you then need to have places for people to queue, which I guess there's an implication of how much other public space, needs to be given over for that. And, I know one of the main routes kind of into it is certainly by the Mound. That's a really popular crossing that comes in. But that section of Princes Street, that south side of Princes Street, has two major kind of bus stops, which are kind of interchanges. Which get busy as people travel in and about. So it raises an awful lot more questions than just, is the experience the right one, I guess. But,
and practicalities of just track and trace of 2.6 million people. If there are 2.6 million predicted visitors from last year, are the operators going to be tracking, tracing those people if there was an outbreak of COVID?
Yeah. So that there's there's a lot of kind of issues for us to be looking to get clarity and kind of answers to on a pragmatic basis, other than we'll hope it all comes out positive in the end. And I think that the Cockburn's position is now emerging quite clear, that we don't support any infrastructure being placed on soft surfaces because of the long standing damage that takes place. And actually I think that the contractor's desire, underbelly's desire to have everything on a single site, despite what the council official said, that there is no other single site capable of taking it well. I think maybe part of the new vision needs to be a multi-site, and
I'd always on hard standing at all.
On hard standing, which makes the impact post-event actually much more readily to kind of repair and get on with things going forward.
One thing I would like to ask at the moment, of course, is what do the people of Edinburgh currently think? And we know from our own Cockburn Association social media, and indeed from some of the more recent editions of the Edinburgh Evening News, that the general public appear to support the cancellation of a Christmas Hogmanay experience as it was in the past, because of COVID and other issues as well. But the council, for example, has not really gone out of its way to ask the residents what they think now of the Christmas market this year, of Christmas markets in the future. What should the festival experience in a 21st century carbon neutral Edinburgh be? And it might be very good, but it probably will not be anything like the festivals we've had in the past. And if there's a very short planning application window, that really isn't going to facilitate a really meaningful citywide conversation on this issue. The council's launching at the end of this month another climate change related consultation, which will be an opportunity, among other things, to raise aspects of Festival Edinburgh in the 21st century. But who's asking the question meaningfully and in an engaging citywide way? Who's asking the question, what do the residents of Edinburgh actually want for their own city going forward?
And of course, we need to acknowledge the fact that we have been promised that, but that's not for this year. That's kind of for next. But things change kind of overall. And you did raise that kind of point quite rightly about the implications in terms of climate mitigation and the city declaring itself to be carbon neutral. And I was taken just by that one figure from our trustee Marianne Trousson at the City for Sale kind of event we had in January, that it took 543 trees over a 40-year period to offset the carbon for one day's travel to the Christmas market. So there's a really interesting kind of bigger issue for that. Look, so
we have to be aware, just to follow up on that, that the black art of carbon management can find ways of shoving all of Edinburgh's carbon into somebody else's backyard. If you're coming to Edinburgh for a festival, that carbon really should be Edinburgh's problem. It's not Seattle's problem. It's not London's problem. It's Edinburgh's issue.
Yeah, I think so. So there's an awful lot of stuff we're expecting to come forward for that. Some interesting things. Hopefully we'll see some answers for this, but it's very clear it's a really sensitive kind of issue. And it's just to emphasize that Cockburn is not against the Christmas market. It's not against the kind of winter festivals. But I think the past few years have seen more problems emerging than from our perspective kind of benefits. I think so. It's how we can do something in a better way that is perhaps a little bit more in tune with the city than it kind of has been. Anyway, other things kind of sit in front of us. And we look forward to a planning application coming out soon, we hope, and what comes forward next.